All-Round View by Khan Imran, published in 1988 by Chatto and Windus Limited, 30 Bedford Square, London. All rights reserved. Copyright Imran Khan, 1988. Topics: biography, sports, cricket, Pakistan, Khan Imran, cricket players, autobiography, cricket biographies. All-Round View, Chapter 5, Pain. On the second day of the second test against India at Karachi in December 1982, I got out of bed and felt a pain in my left shin bone. We had bowled the previous day and I had not experienced any discomfort, and I could not recall any incident on the field that might have caused it. I decided that I must have knocked my leg somehow, and when I got to the ground and started warming up, the pain gradually disappeared and I forgot about it. Little did I know that it would transform my career, my life, and the shape of Pakistan cricket for the next 2 years. The following day, as I warmed up, the pain reappeared and I began to suspect that it might not be an ordinary bruise. We had dismissed India cheaply on the first day and then accumulated a large total thanks to centuries by Mudassir and Zaheer. I felt no discomfort while batting and I was at the crease for some time. With India batting again, almost 300 behind, the pain reappeared when I bowled, but I had been playing non-stop cricket for many months and had had a number of niggling injuries. I still hoped that this was just another of them. I began a new spell after tea with India well set at 100 for 1 and Gavaskar and Weng Sarkar going well. After a couple of overs, the pain disappeared, and in any case, I probably would not have noticed it in the general euphoria of the next hour and a half. It was cooler, there was a cross breeze, and the ball was swinging as it tends to be in the evenings at Karachi. Once I had bowled Gavaskar, the Indian innings folded with most of my wickets coming from fast in-swingers or in-dippers, as some commentators call them. India collapsed to 114 for 7 and I took 5 for 7. We wrapped up the match early on the fourth day, winning by an innings, and I had taken 8 for 60, Pakistan's best analysis against India and the record for a Karachi test. Naturally, I was elated, both as a player and as a captain. I had not mentioned the pain to anyone except Mudassir, who agreed with my theory that I must have bumped my leg. So I proceeded unconcerned to the third test at Faisalabad. I was then at my peak as a fast bowler. All the hard work I had put in was paying off. I felt I had never been so fit in my life and knew that I could sustain long spells consistently hostile bowling. Faisalabad is normally considered a fast bowler's graveyard, but I produced one of the best performances of my career. On a placid Iqbal Stadium pitch, I had a match analysis of 11 for 180 in 55.5 overs against an Indian batting lineup rated by some of the best in the world. India batted first and scored 372, normally a good first innings total. Then, for the first time, 4 Pakistanis scored centuries in the same test innings as we recorded 652, our highest total against India. Zaheer, who had scored 215 and 186 in the first 2 tests, made 168 and I hit 117, including 10 fours and 5 sixes. I hit 21 in 1 over of Kapil Dev, who conceded over 200 runs in the innings. When India batted again, Sarfraz and I made early inroads and they were soon 48 for 3. After that, it was just a matter of time and we won by 10 wickets. In the match, I equaled Ian Botham's record, also set against India, of scoring a century and taking 10 wickets in the same test. But by now, I could feel the pain even when batting. The ball was keeping low, and because I was constantly on the front foot, I was often hit on the shin. For a time, I blamed the problem on substandard bats. Eventually, I consulted a physiotherapist who said it was just a bruise. I did not want anything to interrupt our progress in the series, so I accepted his diagnosis and went to Hyderabad for the next test, where, on the easiest of batting pitches, we ran up 581 for 3 declared. Mudassar and Javed both hit double centuries and put on 451 for the third wicket, equaling the test record for any wicket. Once again, the Indian batting crumbled, declining from 44 for 1 to 72 for 7. I bowled what I still considered to be my fastest ever spell, taking 5 for 3 in the space of a few overs. After this, the pain got worse. A lump appeared on my shin bone, and I kept having to spray the area to dull the pain before bowling. Even so, the agony was intense. I kept bowling until I had crossed the pain barrier, but as soon as I stopped, I could hardly stand. After my efforts in the first innings, when I took 6 wickets, I was unable to bowl properly in a test match for 3 years. My run-up became tentative and I was unable to put much weight on the front foot. We won by an innings at Hyderabad and so led 3-0 in the series, with 2 matches to play. With the series won, I could have opted out of the last 2 tests, but the cause of the problem had not yet been diagnosed. Some X-rays were taken in Lahore after the last 2 days of the 5th test had been washed out, but unfortunately no one in Pakistan had any experience of stress fractures of the shin bone. Repeated loads applied to parts of the skeleton sometimes produce lesions known as stress or fatigue fractures, an injury often found among marathon runners. The bone in question becomes painful and tender. Radiologically, the fracture is invisible at first, which was why the doctors I consulted initially thought it a bad case of bruising. The final 2 tests were boring draws, and despite the now intense pain in my leg, I bowled 66 overs. Only my experience and the Indian batsmen's lack of confidence prevented me from getting a hiding. At times, I was visibly limping in my run-up. Despite my problems, I took 7 wickets in the last 2 tests to finish with 40 in the series at an average of 13.95, easily my best series aggregate. I also scored 247 runs, averaging 61.75. After the series, I again showed my leg to a doctor who trotted out the familiar diagnosis of bad bruising. This was a crucial error. Had I received accurate advice at the point and rested the leg, it would have healed comparatively quickly. Although I hardly bowled at all during the next few months, I kept running, which merely aggravated the injury. When I eventually discovered that I would not be able to bowl for a while, my immediate reaction was one of relief. The pain I had suffered had been so intense that the mere thought of bowling repelled me. On April 1, 1983, new X-rays revealed a huge crack in my shin bone. The specialist said it was one of the worst cases of stress fracture he had seen. He was amazed that the bone had not shattered completely under the pressure I had placed on it, and it would take up to a year to heal. I very much wanted to play in the 1983 World Cup in England, and the doctor said that there was a possibility I could play solely as a batsman. I was prepared to forego the World Cup if that meant that I would be fully fit for Pakistan's tour of Australia that winter. But the BCCP asked me to play in the World Cup as a batsman if at all possible. I was worried because I had never played for Pakistan as a specialist batsman before, nor had I turned out in county cricket for Sussex that summer, and so had not had any much practice. Our batting for the World Cup was no longer the star-studded lineup of previous years, and the bowling attack too was ordinary. I insisted that Qadir was selected even though it was not fashionable to include a leg spinner in one-day international sides, and he proved to be the success of the World Cup for us. We qualified for the semi-finals partly due to brilliant bowling by Qadir in 2 of the matches, and also thanks to Sri Lanka's surprise win over New Zealand in their last match. I managed to finish top of our batting averages, which partly resolved my own doubts. But the satisfaction of batting well could not compensate for the frustration of watching helplessly while our bowlers were getting thrashed. In the semi-finals, we were defeated by the West Indies, who went on to lose the final to India, a fact that did not go down well with the Pakistan press, which expressed its anger by attacking my captaincy and team selection. For my part, I thought it a miracle that we reached the semi-final with the team we had. After the World Cup, I played for Sussex. My batting continued to improve, and I finished the season with an average of about 60, my best ever. The specialist told me I could start bowling a few overs, offer a short run-up. I really enjoyed the 4-over spells I was allowed and took the first hat-trick of my career against Warwickshire. Looking back, I think that if my specialist had really understood the mechanics of bowling, he would not have let me attempt it. After the Warwickshire match, the pain returned, although X-rays seemed to indicate that the healing process was continuing, but further X-rays following a short tour of Jamaica showed unmistakably that the fracture had opened up again. My frustration was intense. Clearly the bone was not going to mend easily, and there was a little chance of my being able to bowl properly on the Australian tour. I had really been looking forward to bowling on the quick Aussie pitches, but even worse was the fact that without me, our attack would struggle, lacking that edge of pace so vital on Australian wickets. In my absence, Pakistan, led by Zaheer Abbas, had played an uninspiring 3-test series against India, all the matches being drawn. I informed the BCCP that I was available to go to Australia as a batsman. They felt that my performance the previous winter had shown the right qualities. I was to captain the team in Australia. I was a little hesitant and had my doubts about the wisdom of the move, but the prospect of returning to Australia as well as my recent success as a batsman overrode my doubts. I also felt that I could captain the side much better than Zaheer, whose approach to the game, like boycotts, was too cautious and self-absorbed. No sooner had I accepted the captaincy than a selection dispute erupted. The inexperienced opener Shoaib Mohammad, Hanif's son, had been included. There was no good reason for his inclusion at this stage of his career, especially as there were others far more deserving of a place. However, Shoaib had the backing of a number of selectors, and the dispute led to the resignation of the selection committee and a split in the BCCP. A pressure group was formed which, together with certain section of the Karachi press, made my appointment as a captain a point of issue. Feeling that Zaheer would be more responsive to their interest, they argued that I should go as a batsman under his captaincy. Nothing came of this, but the unsavory controversy was to color the whole tour and have a pernicious influence on post-tour events as well. In retrospect, it is obvious that I should have not gone to Australia without being fully fit. Pakistan's cricket bureaucracy had long been used to controlling every aspect of the game, and they resented the diminution of certain aspects of their power during my tenure as captain. For them, my failure in Australia was a heaven-sent opportunity. Soon after my arrival in Australia, I consulted a specialist in Brisbane, and the X-rays he took led him to recommend that I should not even bat for 2 months. I sought a second opinion which supported his diagnosis. I discussed the matter with Intihab Alam, the tour manager, who had become a close friend, and we immediately relayed the doctor's opinion to the BCCP. They told me to stay with the team and take my place in due course. Zahir, the vice captain, took over the responsibility of captaincy, and his first act was to issue a statement that this was not the team he would have chosen, and that he was only a caretaker captain. Intihab and I asked him what sort of team he wanted, but on this score he was ambiguous and evasive. He just kept repeating that this was not his team. This was a peculiar attitude because he knew that a vice captain's duties might include taking over in the captain's absence. It was probably a ploy to avoid all responsibility if we lost. We did lose the first test, as Perth by innings on a fast bouncy pitch. We let Australia score over 400 and were then bundled out for 129 and 298 by Lilly, Hogg, Rackman and Lawson. In the second test, we batted first and were again dismissed cheaply. In reply, Australia made 509 for 7, and only a thunderstorm which washed out the last day and a half saved us from another defeat. By now, the BCCP was under pressure to appoint Zahir as tour captain. They wilted under the pressure, but to everyone's surprise, he rejected the offer, repeating that he was merely a caretaker, that he would have relinquished the captaincy as soon as I was fit. In the third test, our batting finally clicked, and we responded to Australia's 465 with 624. When they batted again, Australia were in some difficulty at 121 for 3, but we could not press home the advantage and they batted out time for a draw. After this match, my leg was again x-rayed, and although there was no significant improvement, the doctor felt that I could start batting again. I batted in the nets for hours and then played against Tasmania, where I promptly failed in both innings. This put me in a quandary because I could hardly drop a batsman after the huge score in the previous test. But it was essential for me to justify my presence on the tour, so I omitted the off-spinner Nazir Jr. He had taken 1 for 217 in the first 3 tests, so I thought his absence wouldn't make much difference. I have never felt so nervous going into a test match. If I failed as a batsman, or if one of our bowlers was injured while we were on top, I would be letting the team and my country down. I usually approach each match in a positive and constructive frame of mind, but this time I was not optimistic. On the eve of the match, Dennis Lillee, with whom I have always enjoyed a good relationship, somehow read my mind. He told me that very few people take risks and that those who do gain a lot, although it can always go the other way. We batted first and got off to a good start, thanks to a brilliant century from Mohsin Khan. I went in 30 minutes before stumps. just before Australia took the second new ball and had made 10 by the close. I could hardly sleep the night, but the following day I relaxed and gradually began to play with confidence. By the time Lillee produced one of his unplayable outswingers, I had made 83. We totaled 470, but Australia topped this with 555, largely thanks to Graham Yallop, a master of the type of bowling we possessed, who made 268. In our second innings, we collapsed to 81 for 5, at which point I played the best innings of my career. I managed 72 not out, holding our innings together, and we saved the match. A huge load was lifted from my shoulders by his performance. In the glow of success, I chose to ignore the pain in my leg, which had increased throughout the match. I had batted for a long time and fielded through Australia's big innings. Pakistan lost the last test in Sydney by 10 wickets, the match following the by now familiar pattern. Australia scored 454 for 6 and dismissed us twice for 278 and 210. This was their last test for three tremendous cricketers, Greg Chappell, Dennis Lillee and Rod Marsh. It was a moment of great sadness. In 1972, when I was just a schoolboy, these three had formed the nucleus of the great Australian team which dominated world cricket for years. New X-rays revealed that the wound had opened up again. The doctor advised me to go home and rest for 4 months. Zaheer had already gone back, saying that he needed to work on his benefit, but on his return he wrote a column criticizing the team selection and my leadership. He was preparing the ground for assuming the captaincy himself in the near future. In these circumstances, I felt that if I also left the team, it would collapse completely. So I stayed on for the World Series Cup one-day competition. This series proved to be a nightmare. We lost all but one of our 10 matches. I could bowl and we were completely outplayed. I got a few runs at the first but missed the later matches when Javed Miandad captained the team. The whole experience was torture. I had given my critics all the ammunition they needed to attack me and the board. Looking back, it is easy to say I should have not gone, but in some ways the tour was a character-building experience. I also learned a lot about my teammates, which ones I could rely on and which were fair-weather friends. I returned from Australia to rest at home. There was an almost constant barrage of criticism pouring out from our press. As expected, the board was toppled and the opposition group took over. Zaheer was appointed captain and I was condemned by the press. I found this hard to take and became bitter. All that I had done as captain and player seemed to have been forgotten. The new board treated me with disdain, like a spoiled child who needed to be put in his place. They had always resented the fact that I had not been prepared to grovel before them, and now that it seemed I was finished, all the knives came out. Zaheer continued writing his column in Dawn, in which he snipped at my captaincy and lobbied to be chosen as my successor. Meanwhile, one of the players accused me of being unfair in team selection and of having dropped him for no reason. The new BCCP administration told the press that the senior players had made money on the tour and that I had used my authority to deprive the junior ones of their rightful financial benefits. The slanders and the innuendo were seemingly endless, and there was no way in which I could respond on the field. In March 1984, another round of X-rays suggested that my career was indeed over. I was to get out of cricket like so many other great Pakistani players of the past, abandoned and abused. The prospect of never playing again was depressing, but even harder to face was the fact that I had been humiliated and would never get the chance to redeem myself. My cousin Dr. Farooq spoke to the Punjab Health Minister Hamid Nasir Chatta, who immediately convened a meeting of the top orthopedic surgeons of Lahore. One of the participants suggested a form of treatment which was still an experiment at an experimental stage, whereby the healing process was hastened by means of electrical cycles passed through the leg. As the bone was no longer healing, I decided I was willing to try anything that would give me an opportunity to play again. The treatment recommended was expensive, but was fortunately subsidized by the government on General Zia's personal recommendation. I went to England in April and met Dr. Beard at the Cromwell Hospital in London. He told me that minimum time required for the treatment would be 6 months, that my leg would have to be put in a cast, and that I was to take no exercise at all. For 10 hours a day I could hardly move. The instrument inserted in the cast had to be plugged in to produce the therapeutic electrical cycles. This was probably the most difficult period of my life. It is not easy for a sportsman accustomed to perpetual exercise to adapt to being completely deprived of it. At the same time, I was extremely depressed and bitter about the way I had been treated by the cricketing community in Pakistan. For 6 weeks I hardly left my flat in London. I was so put off by the criticism I had received that I stopped following cricket in the newspapers or watching it on television. I did nothing but read and wallow in self-pity. In these difficult weeks, Emma Sargent, a well-known painter and a good friend of mine, gave me great support. So slowly I began to emerge from my self-imposed hermitage. A friend quoted an old Chinese proverb, "A bitter man is a man who is lost in life." As I started thinking more calmly and rationally about the events of the previous year, I realized that I had taken a big risk in going to Australia and that it hadn't paid off. I should have known that I would be crucified if I failed. Even my anger with Zahir began to fade. After all, he had never hidden his fierce desire to become captain of Pakistan. I mellowed as a person and became more tolerant. In the past, I could not easily have forgiven anyone, a very typical Pathan characteristic. Now I learned how to look through other people's eyes and understand them better. I started going out again and made new friends and began to realize that there was a life outside cricket. The people I was meeting had nothing to do with the game. For the first time since Oxford, I met people outside cricket with whom I had much in common. Initially, I found it difficult and mostly listened, but their company was stimulating, and I was soon an enthusiastic participant in their conversations and activities. My old core of friends stood by me. I have had few but fast friendships, and I am still extremely close to some of the people I met in this period. My natural optimism began to assert itself. Instinct told me that I would play again, although most people thought otherwise. 3 months after my leg was put in a cast, a new set of X-rays showed only marginal improvement. Yet I continued to hope that all would be well. I even began to watch cricket on television again. This period of my life left me with much that was to prove useful later on, and it also helped to prepare me for my retirement. For one thing, I came to realize how fickle public adulation can be. Despite all the difficulties of that time, I am sure I would have been worse off without it. I emerged from it much stronger as a person and with a far wider perspective on life.